Right, so let's jump into this. And you may want to kind of think about your final assignment as we go through some of these concepts, because this is where we're really going to get into some of the nitty-gritties. So we're now really looking at Unit 4, which is examining this entire pay model that we just looked at. So as you saw, this is all the areas that we're going to cover, these four areas. We're going to look at some of these techniques, and this is our objectives. This is all the areas we need to cover when we're looking at how to manage compensation. And the first one we're going to get into is alignment and the importance of that. So we should be able to, at the end of this, define a pay structure by understanding what are levels, differentials, and the different criteria for that. Understand the differences between a job-based structure and a people-based structure. Look at all of the external factors that shape the internal compensation structure. So everything on the external to the organization that is actually shaping how we come up with our way or our structure for compensation. Look at the organizational factors. So this would be internal factors that shape this structure. We're going to look at two very different broad types of pay structures. And then finally, the benefits or the objectives. Okay, so I know it sounds like a lot. It probably is, but it's pretty straightforward once we go step by step. Okay. So as I said, this is the pay model, and we're looking at step one, alignment, and we'll be working through these three for the rest of the semester. So it's all about internal alignment. So let's just think about Marshall Montana. Why not? I hear they launched Carnival. Whatever. So if we think about the band that Marshall has, it's probably not even called HD now. I don't know. But let's think about all the different people in the band. In fact, I have some questions here. What do you believe are all the positions within the band? So we know we have our musicians. So we'll have a drummer, probably a bass guitar, a lead guitar, percussion, definitely the horns. Well, let's hope the horns. It is soca after all. There's probably the keyboard. Yeah. Then we probably have the sound engineer. Then we have the dancers. Then we have the backup singers. Yeah. Now, those of you who are in music probably know a lot more, but let's just stay with those. Now, would we consider that some positions are more important than others? So would we, now I'm a bass, I love the bass, so would I say that the bass man is actually like the most important, or the bass and the horns because it is soca, or would we say that the drummer is more important, or would we say that the backup singers are, or is it the dancers? I don't know. What actually determines if one position is more important than another? Now let's think about this again. Is everybody paid the same in the band? Do we think the dancers are paid the same as the trumpet man, as the drummer, as the backup singer? How are we actually going to determine who gets paid what? How are we going to determine what the differences within those positions are? Do we just look at the position, or do we look at the person actually doing the job itself or playing the instrument itself? So do we say that a trumpeter who now come out and this is his second band, that he should not get as more as somebody who in the business 15 years? But maybe a dancer, it's opposite. Do we give a bright, happy young dancer more than someone who's there long? Or do I just give you more because you're there long? These are the things we got to think about when we're actually designing a pay structure. And this is what we're going to be looking at for the rest. So just, thought I would use this as an analogy here. How do we actually determine the importance of positions? And how we determine if one position is more important? And how do we determine what we pay in people in those positions and the differences between those? Cool? Cool. Oh, right. So, I seem to have gone backwards. Okay, so from that, what is internal alignment? It's also known as internal equity, and it refers to the pay relationships among different types of jobs or different skills or different competencies within a single organization. Okay, so those relationships basically form this pay structure, and as we've alluded to earlier, of course, that pay structure supports the overall strategy, that the overall objectives that the organization is trying to achieve. It supports this idea that work should be flowing or we should be productive. We knowingly want these relationships to form a structure that's fair and of course motivates people to behave. So it's really determining what are all the dynamics or relationships between the different jobs and making sure that they support the strategy, they're fair, and they motivate people to perform. So pay structures is where it all starts. How do we define this? A pay structure, and I'm saying internal because obviously it's internal to the organization, that can be defined by the number of levels at work, the pay differentials between the levels, and the criteria used to determine those levels. So let's slow this down. So an internal pay structure can be defined by these three things. So the number of levels at work. So let's just say, I'm going to think of a really quick example that we might all be familiar with. Let's just think of a fast food restaurant. You might have your frontliners, and you might have the people in the prep areas. They might be your, frontline, probably making minimum wage, lowest level of the org chart. And then on top of them, you might have your supervisors. And then on top of them, you might have the manager. And then you might have an area manager who's in charge of like 5 stores. So just that being able to define that, okay, we have in the store, we have a one level, which is the employees. The second level is the supervisors, the third level is the managers, and the fourth level is the area managers. And let's be real, the area manager might report to somebody else. He might report to an operations manager, so that's 5 levels. The operations manager may be on the executive team, so he actually reports to the CEO. That's 6 levels. Okay, so defining the different levels. Now, in another organization, let's say it's a really small organization, you might have an admin assistant reporting to a manager, reporting to the general manager, and that's it, just 3. Or if we think of maybe some of our public service examples where we have lots and lots and lots of different levels from, I don't know, clerk 1, 2, 3 to 78. No, okay, I know it's not so bad, but all these different levels. You could also look at maybe the police service where you start in as, oh God, I never get it right, a constable, then a sergeant, then an inspector, whatever it is. But again, all of those are the different levels. I think that's clear. So that's one part. The second part is now determining what are the differentials between the levels. Because if we're saying that, each level is higher than the other, then obviously we expect that the pay would go up. So how do we determine what's the difference or the differential between the different levels? Yeah. So do we say that each level gets 20% more than the level before? Or do we say 20% and then the next one gets 25% between? We'll look at an example, but just determining what are the differentials between the levels. And then the big part here is, yeah, that's the end result. The number of levels and the pay differentials is the end result. But what criteria did we actually use to get there? So I should have probably put that first. So this is what a pay structure looks like. And you'll know for your assignment, you're going to actually be trying to design one of these. Let's go again. Levels. So one feature of any pay structure is its hierarchical nature. That's the number of levels, which of course corresponds to reporting relationships. Some organizations are much more hierarchical than others, so they have more layers, while some have very few layers, so they're said to be more compressed. So the pay differences among levels, which the differences amongst what we're paying the different levels, are what we call differentials. A total egalitarian, so that's a term in itself, total egalitarian approach to compensation would be that we take our total compensation budget, divide it equally among all employees, so that all employees get the same amount. So regardless of where you are and what you do, you get the same amount as everybody else. Now we know that organizations will never consider that approach because different levels of employee with different skills and different contributions to strategy should get different amounts of money. So work that requires more knowledge or skills, work that adds more value is usually paid more. So the idea of these differentials is to acknowledge that and of course to motivate people to strive for higher levels of promotion or performance, which would lead to more pay. Okay, so here's an example of what we're saying here. So you can see, now I've done this kind of upside down here. So the entry level position is the engineer. These are random numbers. He makes 52,000 US a year, okay? The next level above him is a senior engineer who makes 63,000. Then there's a systems engineer at 78. So you can see that these are the positions and as they go upward in the organization, I mean, you could be promoted upward with the most senior one being the consultant engineer. So how are we actually working out what the differential is? And usually, so that the numbers make more sense, we look at percentages, okay? So what is the differential here? 11,000. How did we get that? 63, take away 52, there's an 11,000 difference here. Now to work out the percentage, as you can see my math here, I know you all didn't want to do math, but here it is. 11,000 divided by the lower number, the 52,000, is 21%. So we could say between this level and this level, there's a 21% differential. So let's look at what the differential is then between the systems engineer and the senior engineer. 78 minus 63 is 15, divided by the lower number, 63. 15,000 divided by 63, I'm not even going to try and guess, 24%. So here's a completed table. So you'll see 98 to 78, that's 20,000 differential, which actually works out at 26%. So here are some of the things that we've got to be asking ourselves. Are we okay with this? There are some organizations who will say, no, between each level, I want the same differential. I want 20% here, 20, 20, 20. Other organizations will say that as your skill set is increasing, or as your responsibility increases, or as you make more contributions towards objectives, that these numbers should go up more, so that there's a bigger differential between these positions, which is of course why very senior people end up making much more than everybody else. So this is what we mean by levels. And then, of course, this is what we mean by the differentials. And I'm sure you can see that when it's represented as a percentage, there's much more value there. It makes sense in terms of analysis than rather than looking at 11, 15, etc. Okay. So again, this is just the same information here in a graphical format. Some organizations are quite cool with this curve. So, meaning that, you know, they expect that there's a bigger differential as you go up in the organization. But some organizations may want a curve looking like that, meaning that meaning that there's the same amount of differential between the positions. That's just a call. That's just the call or the determination of the organization. So how do we actually determine the levels and the differentials between them? So the first thing we could look at is the content, the work itself. So this is really asking ourselves, how are we doing this? How are we going to come up with what position is on what level and the differentials? So we're looking at the content, the work itself, how it gets done. What are the tasks, the duties required? What's the knowledge required? What are the behaviors? And then of course we got to look at the value of the job. What's the value relative to the organization's objectives? Some jobs are more valuable than others. Let's get that clear in our heads. This is not Animal Farm here, where all animals are equal. Some jobs add more value to the organization's mission statement than others. Okay, not saying that all jobs aren't important. All of them are, but some add more contributions to the organization's objectives. So if I'm looking at the structure and I'm looking at the content, okay. In fact, most organizations do that. They rank jobs based on the skills required. So they look at the tasks and then they look at the skills that would be needed, and then they determine where I'm going to position jobs. Okay. Some other organizations may just look at the value of the work itself. So this is, again, no right and wrong, a decision that you make in determining which positions are going to be placed where. So there are two ways of doing this. There's, you can look at the job itself, which is what we call a job-based structure that strictly looks at the tasks, the duties, the responsibilities, the behaviors. Or we could look at a person-based structure where all we're looking at is the KSAs, the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the competencies. So one looks at the TDR, one looks at the KSAs, hopefully terms you remember from HRM. Task, duties, and responsibilities, the actual job itself. The other looks at the skills, knowledge, and competencies. Now, the reality is the two go hand in hand, because if my TDRs are this, then these are the skills I need to go with them. If my TDRs are more complex, I need more skills. So they kind of go hand in hand, and it's difficult to sometimes see the difference. But it's good to have in our heads where we're going to start. Are we looking at the qualifications of the skills, or are we looking at the tasks and duties? But let's understand that, you know, we tend to incorporate both. So what we'll do next is look at some of the factors that help us shape the structure externally and within the organization.